In 2024, this company built more new energy vehicles than anyone alive, over 4 million of them. It outsold Tesla, and its revenue, near $107 billion, sailed past Tesla's too. Now the part that does not add up. On each of those cars, it nets only about $1,300. Tesla, even after a brutal year, still nets roughly 3 times more. And while almost everyone else was raising prices, this company quietly kept cutting its own. Bigger than Tesla, thinner profit on each car, and dropping prices on purpose. As a car maker, none of that makes sense. So either it is quietly failing, or it is not really playing the car-making game at all. It is the second one. This is a cost machine that happens to output cars. Its name is BYD, and its real story begins 30 years ago, with a battery. Rewind to 1995. Wang Chuanfu is 29, a metallurgical chemist running a state-owned battery lab in Shenzhen. He becomes convinced Japan is about to retreat from cheap, rechargeable cells. His own unit there had been spun out of a Beijing research institute, and he had watched the economics up close. So he quits a secure job and bets on that hunch. He borrows roughly $250,000 from a cousin in finance and starts a tiny battery firm almost no one notices. He is a chemist with no factory, betting against giants like Sanyo and Sony on a hunch about chemistry. Japanese giants own this market with gleaming automated lines he could never afford. So he does the heretical thing and takes those lines apart in his head. Where a Japanese rival sees one expensive machine, he sees a sequence of small tasks a person could do. He rebuilds each one as dozens of manual stations, cheap workers, simple jigs, human hands where rivals use robots. By his own account, it costs 1/4 to 1/5 of the Japanese setup. A line that costs a rival many millions, he can stand up for a small fraction, paid mostly in wages. The result is a cell that costs a fraction as much. Industry estimates put his unit cost 5 to 6 times below the Japanese, at quality close enough to matter. For a phone maker fighting on price, close enough at a fraction of the cost is simply the better deal. Then the orders arrive. Sanyo in 1996. Philips and Motorola during the 1997 Asian crisis, exactly when the whole world suddenly wants things cheap. The crisis that wrecks his neighbors becomes the moment buyers go hunting for exactly what he sells. Motorola takes his lithium cells around 2000. Nokia follows by 2002. By the middle of that year, he has passed Sanyo to become the largest maker of nickel-cadmium cells on Earth. In barely 7 years, a borrowed $250,000 has become one of the planet's largest battery makers. Who is this man bending the world's car market? Wang Chuanfu is no showman. He works around 70 hours a week, spends most of his time on the factory floor, and lives by 4 blunt words. His method is just as unsentimental. By his own description, 60% of a design comes from existing literature, 30% from taking samples apart, and only about 5% from original invention. In July 2002, the battery business lists in Hong Kong and raises over 1.5 billion Hong Kong dollars. It is profitable, respected, and growing every single year. Most founders would stop right here and simply count that cash for the rest of their lives. Wang is about to do the opposite and horrify almost everyone who owns his stock. The battery arm is a money machine, and walking away from more of it looks like plain madness. In January 2003, he buys 77% of a failing state car maker in Xi'an called Qinchuan. He does not want its factory or its cars. He wants the one thing it owns, a passenger car license. In that era, such a license is almost impossible to get any other way, and he needs one to put batteries on wheels. The market reaction is violent. In the 3 days after the news, BYD's Hong Kong shares fall about 30%. One fund manager threatens to dump every share he holds the very next day. Overnight, a respected battery champion is recast as a chemist, gambling the firm on a business he has never run. Deutsche Bank lists 4 reasons it is a mistake: unrelated to the core business, overpriced, a weak target, and damaging to the share's reputation. To almost everyone, it looks like a chemist's vanity project. No one can see why a profitable battery maker would dive into the brutal, low-margin business of building cars. They are all misreading him. He does not really want to make cars. He wants a large, expensive object to wrap his cost engine around. To Wang, a car is mostly a battery with seats bolted on. Roughly a third of an electric car's cost is the pack, the very thing he already knows how to build cheaply. The first car, the F3, arrives in 2005 looking almost exactly like a Toyota Corolla for around $10,000. He skips the cost of original design on purpose, buying years to learn how to build a car. Buyers do not mind the borrowed shape. At that price, the badge matters far less than the bill, and he copies with almost gleeful openness. His engineers buy rival cars to take them apart. When one team hesitates to cut into Wang's own Mercedes, he walks over and scratches the paint with a key. A leaked United States diplomatic cable later puts it plainly. BYD copies a design, then modifies it just enough to convince Chinese courts it has not infringed any patent. The same cable notes the punchline. For about 600 yuan, an owner could swap every BYD badge on the car for a Toyota one. The borrowed shape was never a bug. At $10,000, it was the point, and it works. The F3 sells 63,000 in its first full year, nearly 5 times the year before. The 100,000th rolls off the line in just 20 months. For a first serious attempt by a battery company, beating the forecasts that badly is almost unheard of. By 2009, the cheap Corolla look-alike is the best-selling car in all of China, at nearly 300,000 units. The chemist, it turns out, can move metal after all. The doubters who shorted the stock have just watched a copied compact become a national bestseller. And here is a side of the company almost no one sees. While it learns to build cars, BYD quietly becomes a contract manufacturer, making parts and assembling gadgets for the world's electronics brands. It supplies Nokia and Motorola, then Samsung, and grows into a direct rival to Foxconn, the company that builds the iPhone. Foxconn feels threatened enough to sue BYD in 2007 over poached staff and stolen secrets. Today, that hidden arm assembles more than a third of the world's iPads and machines the titanium frames inside the iPhone Pro. Wang has said it builds most of Huawei's phones as well. So before BYD ever set the price of your next car, there is a fair chance it had already built part of the phone in your pocket. This was never really a car company. It was a manufacturer that could make almost anything cheaply. Now the moment almost everyone forgets. By 2008, the battery business is wildly profitable. The obvious, rational move is to stay a pure supplier and print money for decades. His battery customers are the biggest names in electronics. The safe path is paved, obvious, and lucrative. He refuses. A battery supplier competes on the price of a single cell. He wants to compete on the price of a whole car. Those are two completely different games, with different rules and winners. A cell is a commodity sold by the thousand. A car is a brand and a $30,000 decision. His future rival KTL would take the other road, staying a pure cell supplier. Almost no one else was willing to pay the 15 lonely years it would take to follow Wang into the harder game. To compete on the price of a finished car, you must own almost everything that goes into it. Then one famous outsider sees it early. Charlie Munger pushes the idea hard and sends David Sokol to China to inspect the factories before Warren Buffett, who normally avoids exactly this kind of stock. Buffett had spent a career steering clear of fast-moving technology and unproven foreign founders. In late 2008, Berkshire's Mid-American buys 225 million new BYD shares at $8 each. That is about $230 million for nearly a tenth of the company. For years, it looks like one of the worst bets Berkshire ever made, before it is worth many billions. Munger's verdict on Wang became famous. He called him a combination of Thomas Edison and Jack Welch. Edison at solving technical problems, Welch at getting things done. It is the kind of praise Buffett almost never lends to a founder he has only just met. That same December, BYD launches the F3 Decimeters, one of the world's first mass-produced plug-in hybrids, at about $22,000. The technology genuinely works. The market is nowhere near ready. It carries a 16 kilowatt-hour pack and 60 kilometers of electric range, sold mostly to government fleets. How not ready? In its first year, the F3 decimeter sells 48 cars. 48. The ordinary petrol F3, at a third of the price, sells 290,000. The bet looks insane. The future he had built the whole company around had arrived years too early to sell. For most of the next decade, that is exactly how it looks. The plug-in is too early, subsidies come and go, and the car business lurches from one near crisis to the next. The early mover edge in plug-ins curdles into an early mover tax, paid in losses and patience. In 2011, net profit falls 45%. The next year, it collapses 94% to barely 80 million yuan. An overstretched dealer network had doubled, then revolted, and the sales chief resigned in apology. Dealers that had swelled toward 1,200 outlets walked out as unsold cars piled up on the lots. Up close, the flat line is uglier than it looks. In 2010, Wang sets a wild target of 800,000 cars and misses it by nearly a third. The overstretched dealer network finally breaks. 308 dealers, almost a quarter of the network, quit in a single stretch. The sales chief resigns and posts a public apology for chasing fast growth and mistreating dealers. In Hong Kong, the shares collapse from over $85 to under $20, down roughly half in a single year. And through every brutal month of it, Warren Buffett does not sell one share. Look at the sales line through these years, and it is almost flat, from around 200,000 cars toward under 250. On paper, a slow, grinding failure. By the numbers alone, this is a company that probably should have died several times over. But the doubters cannot see what he is actually doing. He is not building cars yet. He is bending a cost curve year after year and waiting for the exact moment the world finally needs it. Every year of losses is quietly buying down the cost of a battery the world does not want yet. And one quiet division proves the whole idea long before the cars do. BYD's electric buses go into service in Shenzhen in 2011, 200 of them at once, running real city routes all day. A bus runs hundreds of kilometers a day, the harshest possible test of a battery, a motor, and his nerve. Within 2 years, those buses reach the Netherlands, then Los Angeles, then London's 507 and 521 routes. Long before its cars dared go abroad, BYD had proven its electric drivetrain at full scale. Subsidies helped, but everyone got those. What BYD also had was a drivetrain already hardened on the road. Going abroad is not smooth either. In 2013, BYD wins a contract for electric buses in Long Beach, California. Within a year, a flaw in a small business certification gets the whole deal canceled. Nearby in Los Angeles, its first buses are quietly hauled back to the factory. Some smoke, some stall. A bus promised 150 miles of range manages as little as 78. The early hardware is simply not ready. But BYD does what BYD always does. It builds a factory in Lancaster, hires hundreds of unionized American workers, fixes the buses, and grinds its way back in. By the time critics call it a threat, the bus is already run. Then, around 2020, the curve he had bent for 15 long years finally snapped downward, and almost everything about the company changed at once. In March, he unveils the Blade battery. It uses lithium iron phosphate, the cheaper, heavier chemistry rivals had abandoned for sleeker, pricier nickel packs. The trade-off is plain. This chemistry is cheaper and far tougher, but heavier and less energy dense. In BYD's own demo, a nail driven through the Blade pack barely warms. A nickel pack in the same test roars past 500 degrees. He did not build a better battery. He built a cheaper one, just safe enough. To win back the lost density, he packs the long, flat cells straight into the body, reclaiming over half the wasted space. On stage in 2020, Wang promises to erase the word self-ignition from the dictionary of electric cars. Then he has a nail driven straight through his battery, live, to prove the point. This is the same Wang who, years earlier, did something stranger still. In front of reporters, he poured out a glass of the non-toxic electrolyte from an experimental cell and simply drank it. It debuts in the Han, a sleek flagship sedan with a 600-kilometer range for around $33,000. For the first time, the cost machine had also built a car people genuinely wanted. The long-range Han reaches 100 kilometers an hour in under 4 seconds, all wrapped around the cheap chemistry. The numbers confirm it. The Han sells 40,000 in 2020, then triples to almost 120,000 the next year. Desire, finally, on top of cost. For 15 years, the cost machine had built cars people tolerated. Now it had built one they queued for. A year later comes the masterstroke, the DMI Super Hybrid. On a depleted battery, it sips under 4 liters per 100 kilometers, with a total range past 1,000, starting near $15,000. A hybrid priced like an economy car, with the running cost of something far smaller. It undercuts ordinary petrol cars, not just on price, but on running cost, and demand simply explodes. Orders pass 100,000. Waiting lists stretch to 3.5 months, capped only by battery supply. Output climbs from 3,000 cars a month toward 13,000, throttled only by how fast he can build blades. Then a global chip and battery shortage hits the whole industry. Rivals buy parts on a spot market and idle their factories for weeks. BYD mostly makes its own and simply turns production up. While rivals beg suppliers for chips, the company that makes its own quietly gains a full year on the field. Why could it turn production up when no one else could? Because years before, unable to buy the power chips it needed, BYD had started making its own. By 2020, it is the largest domestic maker of automotive power chips in China. So when the shortage strikes, rivals queue for parts they cannot get, while BYD mostly reaches into its own supply. It is not fully self-sufficient, but it is close enough to steal a year while the industry stalls. In 2022, it does something no other major car maker dares. It stops building pure petrol cars entirely and commits the whole company to the curve. No other major global car maker has been willing to walk away from petrol quite so completely. This is the lonely cost curve finally paying off in full. BYD builds cars, batteries, motors, and even chips, often on one connected campus that almost no other car maker on Earth can match. Owning the parts means owning the price, and every cut compounds across millions of cars. And the curve was astonishingly steep. Battery packs fell from over $700 a kilowatt hour to barely $100, and BYD's cheap chemistry rode the very fastest part of that drop. So the cheapest BYD electric car, the little Seagull, slid from about $11,000 to under $8,000 in only 2 years. The floor of the entire global market was now being set in Shenzhen. Every rival now has to answer a price it did not set and cannot easily reach. And it was not one car carrying the company. Half a dozen models, each sold hundreds of thousands a year. The Song around 500,000, the Chin nearly as many, the tiny Seagull over 400. The range runs the whole ladder at once. It goes from a Seagull a normal family can afford, up to the Yangwang, a 6-figure machine that can turn in place and briefly float on water. At the very top, the engineering turns almost absurd. Its luxury Yangwang brand can float through deep water for half an hour and jump a parked car off the ground. It even set a production car speed record near 300 miles an hour. And in 2025, it shows charging that adds about 400 kilometers in roughly 5 minutes. The same relentless curve, now aimed straight at the last excuse anyone had left not to go electric. Even today, in the power batteries that drive electric cars, BYD is the second largest maker in the world. Its rival KTL holds about 37%, BYD near 17%, ahead of every Japanese and Korean name. The cost instinct that began in a rented Shenzhen workshop never once left the company. By 2024, BYD outsells Tesla in total new energy cars, and at the very end of 2023, it had even passed Tesla for 1/4 in pure electric alone. The gap that took 15 years to close finally shut. But here is the tell that explains the whole company. On each car, BYD nets only about $1,300. Tesla, even after its own steep fall, still nets several times that. 2 years earlier, Tesla netted nearly $8,000 a car. By 2024, that had collapsed toward 4, squeezed down year after year, toward the floor BYD had already chosen to live on. That gap is not weakness. It is the whole strategy, stated plainly in numbers. Tesla maximizes the profit on every car. BYD maximizes the cars sliding down its curve. And here is the proof it is not just cheap and desperate. BYD's gross margin is actually higher than Tesla's, around 19% against 18%, while charging far less for the car itself. Whoever owns the cost curve gets to set the floor for everyone else. In 2026, as a brutal price war crushes margins across China, BYD keeps cutting because it had set that floor on purpose. What does it look like when one company owns the floor? In 2023, a price war ignites. BYD launches a plug-in hybrid cheaper than the equivalent petrol car, under a slogan that translates as electric is now cheaper than gas. The cheapest versions start under $8,000. Rivals that cannot reach that price simply die. WM Motor, HiFi, and a Baidu-backed brand that collapsed overnight, leaving unpaid workers and stranded buyers. Of roughly 400 Chinese electric car brands that once existed, only about 100 are still running. Regulators now warn against the very price war that BYD's curve made possible. The floor it set is littered with competitors. The march abroad is not a victory lap. It is the same cost curve simply going global. The Auto 3 leads a wave of exports across Asia, Europe, and the Americas all at once. The way it ships those cars tells you everything. Rather than rent space on other firms' vessels, BYD builds its own ocean fleet. Its first car carrier sails in 2024, holding 7,000 vehicles at once. By 2026, it plans a fleet of 8 such ships. Together, they can move more than 1 million cars a year across the very seas it once had to beg others to cross. And the spread is wide. Around 200,000 exported cars head into the Asia-Pacific region, with roughly 95,000 into Europe and tens of thousands into the Americas. The same model lands in dozens of very different markets, from Australia to Norway to Brazil. Factories follow the cars into Thailand, Hungary, and Brazil, which also softens the tariffs the West is now raising against it. Put it all on a map, and the shape of the strategy is obvious. Build where you sell, and a tariff aimed at imports stops landing on your cars. Factories rise in Hungary, the first by a Chinese car maker inside the European Union, and in Thailand and Brazil. But this global push has a dark side the cost machine cannot engineer away. On the grounds of a shuttered Ford plant in Brazil, labor inspectors find more than 160 Chinese workers in conditions they call slavery-like. By 2026, BYD lands on a government blacklist. The cost machine has costs of its own. And it is still not only cars. About a fifth of revenue comes from making phone parts and assembly for other brands, the old habit of selling its manufacturing to anyone who buys. Strip away the cars, and what remains is still one of the largest contract manufacturers on Earth. And not every bet has paid. A monorail that BYD spent years and billions of yuan building never scaled, stranded in a handful of demo lines and stalled projects abroad. The man does lose. He just refuses to lose the one game he chose. Here is why all of this reaches right back to you. Europe and America cannot simply out-feature their way out of this. They are not being out-marketed. They are being out-manufactured. The advantage is not in the showroom or the advert. It sits upstream, in the factory and the cell. The price, the battery, even the badge of your next car are increasingly decided elsewhere. A company is playing a game most legacy makers still mistake for a simple feature war. BYD's real edge was never a single battery or a single car. It was deciding, back in 1995, that cost is something you engineer, then paying for 30 straight years to be proven right. Not a quarter, not a single model year, but 3 full decades of compounding one quiet advantage. Almost everyone else mistook it for a string of reckless bets. Own the curve, and you no longer have to win any single car. Everyone else simply has to lose it to you, slowly, one cheaper model at a time. It was never about the cars. It was always about the curve.